Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on how the pandemic has changed the landscape of learning and development in organizations.
I think it's been such a fascinating time where we've really had to stop what we're doing and think about purpose. What are we trying to do? Because we have to do it in a different way. We can't do things the way we've always done them. And so this moment to really pause and investigate is we've been doing this forever, but is this the best way to do it? Is it the right way to do it? Is it really solving the problems that we're trying to solve? And so I think that moment to pause has been incredibly important. Partnered with that is the challenge to act and to figure out quickly how do you adapt in a changing world. And I think we all had permission to innovate, and not just permission, but a call to innovate. We had to figure out how to do things differently and still accomplish the broad goals, the broad things that we were working on. It forced us to look at media differently and think about the ways in which we communicate. I think for me, the podcast was interesting. We all spent so much time on video calls or in learning and video in the classroom. To just have audio as the format was really appealing. And I think for me, it was at least a rest from some of the ongoing Zoom. I think then organizations also had to think about how to engage people with grace. This was a time that's been really challenging for all sorts of people. So the kinds of expectations that we had needed to shift and adapt based on what was happening for individuals. I was suddenly working in the same place where we were also teaching second grade. So that changed what was possible for me. Everyone faced different kinds of challenges, but important ones. So I think this need for grace was part of what I saw as being an important trend. And then finally, I think really thinking through the right ways in which we can engage and experimenting around that for learning. So as we were working with educators, we knew that they sometimes needed community. They needed to connect with other educators and to do that in ways that were at a reasonable scale where you could really get to know someone and engage with them. So a smaller learning community. We also saw that people needed to be able to do things on their own time. So asynchronous learning became incredibly important, that our time really was different. Certainly my time was different with second grade at home, but I know that was true for many people where we had to work and learn in the times that we had available. And then I think the topics shifted as well. We changed our focus for the Adobe Education Exchange to really highlight distance learning. How can we help educators who overnight had to learn how to teach differently through an entirely different format? And so we focused on both elevating the stories of folks who've been doing this for years by being to show starting points and beginning places with sample lessons, with ideas of ways in which you could engage with students. So I think that the implications are huge in terms of what's happened last year. What I'm really excited about is what do we take with us? Where are we going? I think the goal is not to go back to the way things were, but to take forward some of what we've learned.
What would you say are some of those key learnings from the past year, based on everything that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think there's a piece around assessment in education, that we can do assessment differently, and that as we're looking at what's really meaningful and matters to students, the systems had to shut down. We couldn't do standardized testing in the same way. And so we had to look for alternatives. That doesn't mean standardized testing should go away, but it probably shouldn't be the only way in which we're giving students feedback and helping them learn and see their progress and growth. I think there are also some interesting questions around when we need to be in person and when we don't, that we've often defaulted to in-person being the best. One of the things that stood out for me during the pandemic is that some people actually did better when they were able to focus, when they were able to have more quiet, when they were able to learn at their own pace and at their own time. And so I think there are questions that we need to continue to investigate about the best modalities for learning and to be broad in the ways in which we think about that. I hope also some of the issues that were really highlighted around equity are things that we carry forward as well. That there were certainly things in education that were long-standing challenges, but the pandemic brought them into really stark relief. Some of what I hope we take with us is a recognition of what we've learned in this past year, a recognition of some of the things that we need to change, and this sense of not just permission, but a call to really do things differently, to do them differently in a way that better serves all of us and that better serves our goals and our needs.
Do you feel like you're starting to see that a little bit more in the discussion, in the way things are being talked about and executed a little bit? more?
I hope so. And I think there's a risk of just being tired and wanting to relax back into the way we had done things previously. So I think it's a call for leaders to be able to continue to nurture those conversations, to continue to have an eye set on the big picture of where we're going. It's also a call for individuals to reflect on what they've learned and share that. As I think about, particularly in the education space, a lot of the news lately has been focused on this question of where do we go from here? It matters to hear from the leaders, from the Secretary of Education, from folks who are shaping education policy, but it also matters to hear from the educators who had very specific experiences and important learnings this year. So I'm hopeful as we go forward that we will carry things with us, but I think it's going to take a lot of work to continue to maintain that focus and that sense of urgency around this work.
I think a similar conversation is also happening around how organizations are going to be handling similar situations. What's been your experience so far as an employee?
Within Adobe?
Yeah.
Very quick to make decisions about with prioritizing its employees and communicated that clearly. So I think that sense that Adobe was being thoughtful about how to engage and keep employees safe and provide the right kind of support and grace as needed, that was an important piece right away. I think then we focused on how do we help people be successful learning from home? What are the things people need to set up an office in their house, which they haven't done before? How do we ensure that the work schedules function in the right kinds of ways, that parents are supported, that if someone has a family member who's ill, that they're also supported during this time? And I think there were lots of learnings for the organization about how well we were able to keep going in terms of developing software, delivering product that we needed to deliver, ensuring that we pivoted to support our customers that were also challenged to figure out how do we communicate? How do we ensure that our voices are heard in a really noisy space? How do we continue to innovate and adapt so that we can measure the impact of our work? And so I think that some of what I've seen Adobe do is about internal customers. It's also internal customers. Some of what I've been really impressed that Adobe's done is support employees, but also our customers in figuring out how to change and adapt in a world that is moving so quickly around us and requires us to think differently.
And how do you think organizations have done in keeping up with this, because there has been such a rapid change in how we're working, how we're delivering, what we're doing as employees? What are some of the challenges that organizations have faced in keeping up with training their employees around this, making sure that they're aware of what they need to do to get sort of the job done in a very changing times?
Well, I think like all of the segments in the economy that things changed completely and we had to reinvent that. So figuring out how to support employees learning meant we had to go back and start again and figure out how do we reach people? What are the kinds of things that they need right now? The topics changed. So focusing on how do you run a meeting or manage a team that's remote? How do you ensure that you're really taking care of the needs of your employees and your customers? Then there was a lot of newness of figuring out how to be on a video conference all day and be able to really work well in that kind of setting. What I think that also reflected in the ways in which we set goals and the kind of work that people were doing. We reprioritized everything after March of 2020. What's the work that really needs to happen? What's the work that we could put on a slow roll that we can pick up and come back to? And so I think some of those efforts are things that I hope help us in the long term in terms of thinking about prioritization. How do we measure the impact of our work? How do we pivot quickly as circumstances change? In this case, the pandemic changed quite a lot. But as we look forward, we expect to see ongoing change in the kinds of technologies that people use, the problems that we have to solve. So to have companies have to have had this experience of learning to be more nimble organizations, more focused on really the essential skills, and then rolling up our sleeves and innovating and figuring out how do we do this? We've never done this before. Lots of trial and error, lots of innovation, room to fail, but ultimately the learnings are what matter.